Welcome to Power Up Your Practice, the go-to podcast for law firm owners and managing attorneys working on the business, not in it. I'm Ruby Powers, your guide into the heart of law practice management, bringing you insights from leading legal minds, trailblazing attorneys, and expert guests who provide you with an actionable perspective on running your firm more effectively and efficiently. Prepare to open your mind, be inspired, and power up your practice to the next level. Hi, everyone. This is Ruby Powers, your companion through the ever-evolving landscape of law practice management, and welcome to Power Up Your Practice, where every episode we get to hear our guests' superpowers and their perspectives on reaching success and something really cool about them. And so today we have Victoria Collier. She's from Houston originally, so we just found that out. She's the founder and CEO of Quid Pro Quo. She's a seasoned entrepreneur with over 20 years of experience in the legal industry. She's a certified exit planning and value builder advisor and been coaching lawyers since 2008 on how to add value to their law firms. And after building and then selling her own seven-figure law firm in 2020, she founded Quid Pro Quo. And it's now her mission to teach others the art and science of creating turnkey law offices, positioning to transition and selling for profit. And she also runs the podcast, so the host of the Smart Lawyer's Position to Transition, which is how I first heard about her. So welcome to my podcast, Victoria. How are you doing?
Thanks, Ruby. I'm doing great. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I think we have some people in common because Charity Anastasia told me that we were talking one time and she said that she was on your podcast, and then I saw a reference to your podcast and I binge listened to it for a while, and I was just so intrigued about what you do, and it's really an area that I feel like a lot of lawyers are sort of mystified from. Like, how do you prepare your practice for sale, and even like being able to buy a practice? So what are, let's see, there's a lot to unpack here. So what got you into what you're doing? And then we'll go from there.
Sure. Yes. And Charity and I, we've done some webinars together for the ABA and things like that. So she's been phenomenal. So as far as what got me into this so I did start my own law firm from scratch right out of law school in 2002. I was kind of an older, not terribly old, but an older student. I was 32 when I opened my own practice right out of law school, and built it up over 18 years. And when in a niche that I love, which was estate planning and elder law, I had worked at a nursing home when I was 18 years old to support myself. And I love advocating and just being there for the elderly. And so when I opened my practice, it was in that practice area. And I'm also a veteran. I was in the military. And so my niche within elder law, which is a niche itself, was veterans benefits. And I taught lawyers across the United States veterans benefits. And really, that's where my passion was. But what got me here was I was standing on stage on Veterans Day about to give a presentation. And this widow of a veteran in the front row started heckling me before I even got on stage. And I was like, shut up. Except it was in my mind a lot more egregious than that. And so at that moment, I was like, I don't need to be here anymore, because this isn't how I should be reacting to my people, the elderly and veterans. So at that point, I knew that I was done. There's burned out and then there's done. Burnout you can come back from, but when you're done, you just can't. And so I knew I was done. And so I put together a 2-year plan. Well, I don't know how, I didn't know at the time how long the plan would take, but I put in a strategic plan to exit. And so that's what I did, not knowing that I would start this business called Quid Pro Quo to help others do the same. At the time, I just knew that I had bought a farm. I was going to farm hemp for CBD products for seniors, because I still love seniors, and house my daughter's horse on it. And so that's what I was thinking, is I'm just going to be a farmer. And then a lawyer called me who was in my own neighborhood here in Atlanta, and she was looking to sell her law firm, and she was calling to see if I wanted to buy it. And I told her that, I was very honored actually to even be considered, because it takes a lot of trust to turn your firm over to someone else. And, but I was under a non-compete because I had already sold mine.
Oh,
Nobody
yeah.
knew. And so during that conversation, she asked if I could help her sell hers, even though she was already working with an advisor. She crossed over and she was the first firm that I sold, which went great. It was all cash up front, a very tiny transition period. And it was awesome. So I thought, this is good. I can keep doing this. And so I had already gotten the credentials before I sold my law firm because I'm an estate planning lawyer. I help, in estate planning, I help businesses exit.
Oh.
So I was already credentialed. I just, now I was putting it to practice.
Wow. Okay. That makes sense. And I guess you sort of answered my other question. Your farm's somewhere in Atlanta, or is it another state?
It is. Well, originally I bought an 89-acre farm, and it was 2.5 hours outside of the city limits of Atlanta. But that was too far. And after growing hemp for 2 years and having my animals way out there, and me essentially going there sometimes every day, back and forth, back and forth.
Wow.
I sold it after 2 years, and now I live on a hobby farm that's 3.5 acres. And so we have horses, goats, chickens, ducks, and dogs.
So what is a hobby farm is like just for fun? Like you're not selling, or what's the definition of a hobby farm? I've never heard that term.
Generally it's 10 acres or less.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And so mine is 3.5 acres, and I'm literally 25 minutes from the airport. So it's like I'm in the city, but I'm out of the city. And so it's really the best of both worlds. And I don't grow hemp anymore.
Okay. Okay. Well, wow, I learned something new about hobby farms. I grew up on a dairy farm in Missouri, so I was curious. And my parents also made us move on to an orchard for a little while too. So that's definitely interesting. Okay, so going back to selling and things like that. Okay, so let's see, what's a good way to go through this? Because a lot of people, lawyers weren't allowed to sell their practices until what in the 70s, or was it 80s?
Well, technically there wasn't any law on the book until 1991, and that's when the ABA put some regulation in it. People had been trying to do it since the 50s, that we have recorded in case law, but there was a whole lot of negativity and not permitting it because their stance at the time was you can't sell goodwill, and that's all there is in a law firm because it's the lawyer. And so yes, for a long time it was prohibited, and so lawyers tried to get around it by selling assets of the firm, like the furniture and things like that. And then the courts easily saw through that and said you can't do that. But however, when I say you couldn't, there actually was a carve out. You could, if you had a partner, and you could then transfer it to the partner. The partner could actually buy it,
Okay.
but you had to have a partner. So that excluded all solo practitioners.
Okay, so that's why we had this whole history of just adding a partner, and then, but you could just add the partner, and then the partner who wants to leave could just sell their shares. Okay, that's how they did it. Yeah.
Correct.
So if a person, because I do law practice management and consulting, and I talk to lots of people about law practice management. What do you generally tell people when they're looking to sell? Like what are some of the key components on trying to get their firm in tip-top shape? And how far into the future do you suggest to start doing that, thinking about that, doing that?
Yeah. So speaking about a lot to unpack. So first and foremost, as far as the duration of time to spend doing that, the first question we have to ask ourselves is, do I need any financial support after I exit this firm? And if so, how much financial support do I need? Okay. And then that leads to the next question, and that is, or the next investigation, and that is, what is my firm worth and what could I get out of it?
Mm-hmm.
That then leads to the next thing as far as, is that a lump sum or is that a stream of income, right? And so that's where the reality starts coming in. And so then when we can, at least at the 10,000 foot view level, have those conversations, then we can analyze the firm and see, what do we need to do to position it to get there for that value, so that you can live the rest of your life however it is you intend to live it, right? Just like a house that you're going to sell, typically you don't just throw the for sign sale up in the front yard without cleaning the bathrooms and the kitchen and maybe even doing some renovations, right? They say throwing lipstick on the pig, but you position it so you get the most amount of money from it. And law firms are no different when it comes to that. There's certain things you can do to, number one, make it seem desirable, and number two, increase the actual value of it.
Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of that seems to be similar to just preparing a business to franchise, like you cleaning up your operations and your systems, making it more of an asset versus, a liability. I mean, sometimes I've had people come up to me and say, would you be willing to buy my practice? And like you were mentioning about it being an honor, and then I start asking some questions and I find like, well, maybe you should go work on that before you talk to people, because, like if you're not in one case management system, or it's a lot of paper and not digitalized, or if you don't have things written out, or those types of things. But what are some of the things you tell people to do?
Well, you said it right, hit it on the head, as far as lawyers need to start thinking of their businesses, or I should say, thinking of their law firms as an asset. And as an asset, what do we need to do with that, right? And another way to say asset is, think of our law firms as businesses, because the business is an asset. And within the business, we can create other assets. One of those is, as you said, the standard operating procedures. Another is your team. If you have a team, that can be valuable depending on the culture within the walls, right? Or the virtual walls at these points. So those are assets. Do you have, predictable income? Do you have a steady stream of leads coming in? All of those on their own are micro assets within the macro asset of the business itself. But we've got to make that shift into, I'm not just a lawyer, I am a business owner. Even if we're a solo practitioner, we still can build assets within a firm that doesn't include team, right? That would be, I'm coming in to buy this law firm that has super efficient systems and processes. So that way I don't need a team, let's just say, for example, and I can profit very well that way. And it's really a plug and play, right? So all I have to do is either, as a buyer, hire a lawyer to do this, or I can step in and be that lawyer to do that. And then I'm looking at my profit margin either way. So what I tell people is, let's look at what assets you have, what assets you could easily put in place without spending tons of money, and how much energy and effort you have and want to put into it before selling it, right? Because there's lots of things we could do, but some people don't have the wherewithal to do it anymore because they waited too long. They are burned out and they're done, and they just can't even think about doing anything to their firm other than closing the door.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I've heard some people say you only need like a year or two, but then I've heard some people say you need like a decade. And I mean, like, no, seriously. And I mean, I think it's about energy and bandwidth. Like if you're sort of done and you're like, I'm not going to change, then it's going to be it's going to be a struggle for you to take like the real estate agent comes in and she's like, you need to get rid of that. You need to get rid of that. You need to put some paint over there. And then they're like, I'm not going to deal with that. The next person can deal with it,
Well, the truth is in there somewhere between a year and a decade. And a lot of what makes the difference is you will hear, and I'm very open about the difference between old school and where we are today. And old school would tell you you need a decade because in their mind, you are hiring your replacement. You are shaping and molding and training your associate as your replacement. And that does take time. Okay. But in the new world, you don't have to do any of that. And you could sell your firm in a year if you made your decision today. I mean, I've sold firms in less time than that. So if it's a good firm, has what it needs, or just understand the difference between actually selling a business and selling a book of business. People transfer their books of business to other lawyers all the time, either for nothing or for a little pittance of a stream of an income, and sometimes it's more than a pittance. Sometimes it's actually worthy. But if you want to just sell a book of business, you don't need that much time. If you actually want to get real value out of your firm, then it does take longer, generally speaking, unless your firm is already queued up for that. And some are.
Okay, so this might be a stupid question or a brilliant question, but what would you define as a book of business? Is it like people you've served in the past or are currently serving? Is it like a contact list? Is it like that you are going to have future business resulting from it? Like, how would you define it?
So I would define the book of business as all of your prior clients that you have some sort of contact for, as well as your current clients, as well as your referral sources. So basically your entire database, talk about old school, your Rolodex. So there's that. But in addition to that, I would also consider your book of business that phone number and that website, if you have a website. But that phone number, because just because you close the doors doesn't mean that phone number is going to stop being used by people. It's still going to ring. It's just there's no one there to answer it. It's the whole, do you hear it? Do you hear the tree fall in the forest if it falls and no one's there? The phone is still ringing. It's just no one's there to pick it up. So that's part of a book of business.
So that's a lot of different parts that I think attorneys don't think about, because and they might not be collecting all the content in one place that they have all their emails and numbers and names, or just you mentioned the referral sources. That's also essential as well. But I don't think people would normally think about that in the book of business.
No, and let's just think about it for a second. With estate planning firms like mine and immigration firms like yours, these are ripe for branches of business, because we help one family member and you cannot say that another family member doesn't need a will or isn't going to die or anything like that. Or in your case, you get a visa for one family member. Now they're here alone. Don't they want company? Don't they want their other family members here? It's just a branch of opportunity, So
yeah, I know. I catch myself talking about, I'm talking about one person. I was like, well, what about your parents? Right. What about the siblings? I'm like, I'm sorry, I know we're talking about you, but those people need to take care of this too.
Close the first sale first and then get the other.
Yeah. Sometimes I get it. Well, sometimes it helps them. So that's why I have to ask them lots of questions about their family. I think this leads us into valuation, because I think a lot of, I don't know, I've listened to lots of CLEs and webinars about valuing a practice and a business, and it just seems like it's all over the map. You multiply the last 3 years of revenue times whatever, some multiplier. And then, there's little apps for this, and you can pay a lot of money for that. How would you break it down? What's some of your rule of thumb evaluating?
Well, first and foremost, I'd say you shouldn't ever use a rule of thumb. Ever.
Okay.
Nonetheless, people do. And you can't get away without talking about it. But I will tell you what other people say the rule of thumb is. And I'll tell you why that's just crazy to rely on. But the rule of thumb that I've heard and that you can research and get on Google is either 0.5, which means half, all the way up to 1.5, which means a time and a half of your gross revenue, okay? Or 3 times your net revenue, your net income. And so first and foremost, one reason why it's dangerous to use rules of thumb is people don't understand the difference between using the word revenue and income. Revenue is gross, income is net. People don't understand that. So they want to do 3 times gross, and that's outrageous. In a law setting, generally speaking, it can certainly be well worth it in the right firms for sure. But the other is that, let's just take an example. If you have a $1 million law firm, and I use the rule of thumb of 0.5 gross and 1.5 gross, my margin there is it's worth between 500,000 to 1.5 thousand. So who's leaving money on the table? We're leaving a spread of $1 million on the table. That's just not sensical. And so the valuations, when done properly, are not based solely on prior income. And one reason for that is that the person, generally speaking, who is managing this firm, bringing in that prior income or had influence over that, isn't there anymore. So you can't base your success on that person's success. That's number one. Number two is that there's a lot of opportunity that generally is not taken into consideration when buying a firm as to how to actually increase that income. And that's one of the things I do as an advisor is I'm not just going in and valuing a firm based on its prior income. I'm looking for where's the opportunity that this burned out owner doesn't have the energy to take care of, that if we did just this one small little thing, the firm could blow up in a positive way, right? And so it's much more involved, let's just say. So I don't use rules of thumb, but what I do is I use 2 different valuation methods that blend various different valuation methodologies. And so when I do a valuation, they get 2 different reports. One is more global and one is niched into their practice area in the United States based on the size of their firm. And we're looking at prior income. We're looking at future income possibilities. We're looking at the team. We're looking at the other assets you and I talked about earlier. And what's the value of those?
So what are some of the things I guess you sort of answered it, like what are some of the other things people can do to help increase the value of their practice?
The number one thing is you've got to focus on your net profit, because nobody wants to walk into a business when there's no profit, and there's no way to make profit because you're overpaying your employees. You have systems or you don't have systems, let's say. And so people are just stepping over themselves. It takes them 30 minutes to find a file. I was a paralegal before I was a lawyer, and I can tell you how much time was wasted with one particular lawyer in this law firm that had 5 lawyers, that he never knew where his files were ever. And, and it's just kind of like, how much time, and that's labor cost, right? Things like that. So number one is find where we can profit. And we need to increase our net profits. I do valuations of firms where their profit is only 7% per year, 12%. Sometimes 18%. We need to get that profit up, preferably 30% or more. If you want to get an SBA loan, even more than that. And SBA, I love the option of getting SBA loan for both sides of the deal. But that's the number one thing I would focus on is net. The opposite side of that coin, though, Ruby, is that we have some firms that have too much net, like 60%, 70%. And that's because they're doing everything themselves, and they don't, the entire business is dependent on them, right? Now, if you have somebody who wants to walk in and be that person, that's a beautiful situation. But if you want actually someone who's buying the firm as an investment, nobody wants to work 80 hours a week. I mean, not anymore. I don't know of any millennials that want to. So
I see. And that's, I guess, some of the common pitfalls, or what are some of the common trends or pitfalls you see when you're working with a law firm owner and they're trying to prepare? Like, they might not be paying themselves enough, or they might be working too much, and it's gonna take two people to replace them potentially, or they don't have the systems in place. A lot of
yeah,
those things.
I would say the mindset is the biggest pitfall as far as the ego that goes on with, I'm the only one who can do this, which is oftentimes why they haven't hired staff, because they don't trust the ability of others to do it as good as them. They don't want to manage people. And so it's hard then for them to imagine someone else buying their firm, even though they cognitively say they want that. They will sabotage every effort for that to happen because they're the best, and they can't let go of that. So I would say that's number one. Number two is, I mean, there's so many pitfalls, but not good record keeping, to where a prospective buyer can come in and really see how you manage workflow, right? And unsophisticated buyers, they're not going to think about that. But a sophisticated buyer will, because you've got liability, right? And you can talk all day long about, well, if you just buy the assets and not the entity itself, you just do an asset sale, that it cuts off the liability. And legally, in many cases, that could be true. Nonetheless, these people are going to call you because they need more work, and you've got this mess and you don't have a clue as to what was done before. And then it makes you look like you're not professional. And in fact, it was the prior person, right? So cleaning up the files, getting rid of all the paper, just getting rid of all the paper. I almost bought a law firm this past year, and literally there was a storage. When I say storage, it was a building, like probably 800 square feet. It was just nothing but boxes of files. And then when I was actually in the office, they were all over the place too. And I was like, before I buy this firm, you've got to get all this scanned in and get out of here. I'm not going to buy the firm unless this is not here, kind of stuff. So you've got to think about, what do the people of today, how do they want to run their practices? And then when we go to sell our practice, we've got to look as close to that as possible. Unless you're going to sell to, you're a 75-year-old selling to another 75-year-old, that would be fine. But somebody who's, 50 isn't going to want to come into somebody who's, firm started in 1930 and it still looks like it's 1930.
So I thought a lot of things when you were saying that. Like, I was once approached by someone who wanted to sell me their book, but a business, but it essentially was a whole bunch of boxes of contact information that I was going to have to mine through. And I was like, this sounds like more work than, like, how am I going to, how do I know they still want something or need something? And like, how would you approach that scenario? Because I think like this whole, I want to sell you my practice, or do you want to buy my practice? That looks like a good practice. I think these things happen when you're least expecting them. And then like, that's why we need to know what to do. What would you say to that scenario?
Right. So I would say that, first of all, I've actually helped potential buyers or prospective buyers do that exact analysis. And at the end of the day, when it is a book of business that's essentially landing on your lap, and you want to say, is this a good opportunity or not? Should I pay for this or not? And what should I pay for this? Is at the end of the day, you should analyze that just like you would any other marketing tool that you would use. And how much do you spend on other marketing to get a lead? Because that's what you're buying right there, is you're buying a lead. So what would you spend to buy a lead that may or may not hire you, right? And so when you do the research, lawyers spend anywhere from $3 to about $550 per lead, depending on the type of practice that you're in. Okay. And so the other thing that you would be looking at, so where's the difference between $3 and $500? Well, the difference comes in as to how current is the data. Is this email going to work when I use it? Is the phone number going to work when I use it? Are they still at that same address? Well, that's higher value. And then how often are these leads, are these prior clients, whomever, how often are they touched? Do they get a weekly email? Do they get a monthly newsletter? Do they get a quarterly call? Like, for example, that's what my law firm did with all of our contacts in ours, was they got a weekly email, they got a monthly newsletter, they got a quarterly call. That's hot, and hot means higher value. And so I'm willing to spend $100 for that lead versus $3 for something that's been sitting there for 30 years that I don't have a clue, and it's not in a database that I can just transfer right over. I've got to actually hire a clerk to input that data. That's almost worth nothing. So that's how you would analyze it. It's nothing more than a marketing tool. And what would you spend to get a lead?
I like that answer. Yeah. So when you, like, if you're considering to sell, who do you need in your team? Like an advisor to help you get your firm in shape, like a broker? I mean, like who are all the people you need?
Well, some lawyers would tell you that you don't need anything because they're a lawyer and they can do everything themselves.
Yeah, an ideal team.
The ideal team would be someone who can give you a value of your business. So at least what you're willing to walk away from, right? So the value of so evaluation professional. And I would say, of course, I'm a little biased. I would say somebody who actually values service-based businesses and or specifically law firms, because all businesses are not created equal and they should not be valued the same, or use the same criteria, I should say. So evaluation specialist. At some point, you need a lawyer who is going to draft the asset purchase agreement or the entity purchase agreement for you. Okay. Beyond that, you also need a tax professional to guide you on, okay, so if I'm going to get this money, how is that taxed? Because when you do the agreement, there's going to be negotiations around how much of this is goodwill, how much of this is the actual practice, because each of those are taxed differently. And if I'm going to stay during a transition period and I'm going to get paid for that, is that part of the sale or is that separate compensation? And all that's negotiable because it's taxed differently for the buyer and the seller. Okay. So CPAs need to be involved at some point as well. And beyond that, I would say a great therapist, because it is emotional on both sides. And literally it's emotional. So I say somebody who can really keep you focused on what is the end goal. And does this issue really, is it a make or break issue? Right.
That sounds great. I mean, and that's a good point about the therapist, because it's not the exact same thing, but I bought my building that our office is in a year and a half ago. And I acted as my own real estate agent, and it was very tumultuous. It was when the interest rates were like skyrocketing, like every week. And like, anyway, so it was so stressful. And to do that while I was still running the firm and doing all my normal stuff.
And I would say that if you're selling to your associates, these professionals become even more important, because you've got a boss and a subordinate negotiating with each other on the same level professionally, and yet every day they show up on different levels. And so having that neutral, or at least their own parties, having those conversations to then guide them on how to have the conversations so they can maintain a great working relationship, because it could fall through, right? And they're still there working together, or somebody's losing an employee. Right. So it's even more important when you're selling to an associate.
I've had about 4 or 5 friends go through that, and only one ended up in being a successful merger, and the rest just left and started their own practices. But
do they have advisors? Do they have guides?
I know a couple of them had advisors, but yeah, a couple of them did. I think a lot of some of it was the associate who grew to being like the right hand number two to the number one. There was like promises made and like negotiation, and then like things changed and over time. So, but that's thanks for explaining out the different teams. And so I think another concept is like, what are things? Well, let's talk about the transition. So there's a couple different options. Like you could say you could do the sale and it could be done in less than a year, and then maybe you're like, bye, good luck, here's the keys. And then there could be like you're transitioning over the course of a couple of years or something like that. What do you see most often, and what seems to be the happy spot for most people?
So when you're selling to a third party outside buyer that's coming in to buy your firm, what I see most often is a 6-month transition period where the seller stays, but not full time. Generally, the seller is scaled back. They are just doing the things that they bring to the table very well. Either, let's say, for example, they still want to do consultations because they're great and they like those conversations, that kind of stuff. Or let's say, for example, they like being out in the community, but they don't want to do any of the work. So they'll go out and be the face of the firm and start, introducing the new owners. So they're really just handing off relationships more than anything else. So I see that a lot. There are some sellers that want to stay and keep doing the actual work. They just don't want to be involved with the management of the people, or the getting of the business. They don't want to do the business side of law, and they just want to be a lawyer again. So those people are willing to stay 1 to 5+ years. And I see that a bit as well. So I can't say that there's one thing that I see more than the others. Every situation, and I know this is going to sound cliche, but every situation truly is different, which is why I love it so much. Just like, you work with immigration families, they may have similar issues and goals and desires, but every family is different. Right. And and this is blending two families. When you've got a buyer coming in, it's like a step parent coming in. If they've got, staff, now you've got a step parent and a parent that, who has more authority? Well, the step parent, sort of, because they just bought the firm. And so it's working through all these relationships too, because the transition isn't just the outgoing seller. It's the team. If there is one, that whole, that has to be worked very delicately.
When I was a law student, I was at 2 firms I had previously worked for as a law clerk, and they decided to merge together. And so I sort of saw for a little short while the blending of the cultures and the systems and the case manager. And I think there's even consultants just for that particular niche. Just to help people through that transition, which is so critical, because sometimes they can reject each other and it can not go so well.
Right.
What are some of the things to consider? I mean, it's probably just exactly what we've said about like if someone offers if you want to buy a firm, what are some of the things to think about?
First and foremost, I would be looking for any malpractice, issues, and so that's looking through the files. And I almost never see buyers that do that. Is actually looking through the files to see what is the communication pattern or culture of the firm. How often do we communicate with our clients? How often do we return their calls? Things like that, right? Because that's the number one reason still that lawyers get disbarred is communication or the lack thereof. So number one, I'd be looking for that kind of information. Number two, I'd be looking at the team and the systems. It's how is this firm going to continue to operate through people and through systems? And where's my opportunity to expand? Because a buyer rarely wants to come in and just stay the same, right? Because buyers are thinking from an entrepreneur's perspective. Generally, they're investors. They want a return on their money. So we're looking for opportunities, not just to stay the same financially, but where can we expand? This is something that buyers should be doing, but something that they don't do. And that is this: they should be thinking in their brains two things. One is, how can I maintain first and expand second? Because buyers come in and they start making all these changes from the beginning, and then they start losing the staff, which then they start losing the revenue, and then they
Mhm.
start blaming the seller. And it wasn't the seller. It's because
Mm.
they came in, they fools rush in, and then they make changes, right?
Yeah.
Come in and do nothing. If I learned anything in my military time that I was in for 6 years, people shift all around, all the world, all the time, and you change rank, and then your responsibilities are different, and then you shift places. The first thing you do when you become a new rank, a higher rank, or you go to a new base, is you do nothing but observe. Why are you buying this business? Because it's already a good business to begin with. So why would you come in and make all these changes?
Mhm.
So that's what I think buyers should be looking at, is not just the business, but looking at themselves and how are they going to maintain the good that's there, and then enhance and expand with what their skill set is.
That's a really good point. I mean, I guess the only way you still would want to observe, but if it was like a fixer upper or something, you might need to work a little harder at improving it. But you still would want to observe and see, because to make the assessment on where to improve, and maybe
Right.
you probably would have observed it before you even decided to buy, to make sure it wasn't, a lemon or whatever a house is of a lemon. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm mixing my analogy.
Yeah. So there's certainly situations where you do come in and immediately you have to make some hard decisions, like firing somebody. If
Mhm.
you have one-on-ones with all the team, and all the team is pointing fingers at this one person, yeah, sometimes you do have to say, oh, well, I wasn't planning on making any changes the first 3 months, but this person has to go. I can see that they are cancer. So that's
Yeah.
okay. Sometimes you obviously want to integrate systems, right? Um, but try to keep the culture as similar as possible for the first 6 months, and start making slow integrations and changing for your personality, your leadership style, your team, things like that. That's what I would say.
So before we start closing up, my nerdy going through case management change self is wondering, like, how much which case management softwares do the different firms use? Do people bring that? How much do they weight that, or they're just like, we're just going to deal with it when we have to deal with it?
They just deal with it when they deal with it.
Mm.
And
Okay.
so what I tell sellers is, we want to be appealable to the widest variety of buyers. And so that means you should have something that works well and that has value to the current business and the profitability of that business. A buyer may come in and keep exactly what you have, and that's going to be very valuable to them. An associate that is buying the firm, that's very valuable to them because that's what they're using. A third party that's much bigger, has their own systems, they don't care, and they're not going to put any value to it because they're going to switch over to their own. Oftentimes, sometimes they don't, sometimes they just keep it, but oftentimes, so they won't put any value. So we can't make our decisions based on what we think somebody else will value it. What we've got to do is create a business that we can throw a wide net across, and it will be desirable no matter what.
Awesome. Well, so we usually like to ask every guest, what's your favorite board game? Because I like board games, and I think we learn a lot about business and life. And so, which one's your favorite and why?
So my favorite board game is called Cash Flow, that was created by Robert Kiyosaki.
Oh,
And
rich
I've been,
dad, poor dad guy. Yeah.
say again.
The rich dad, poor dad guy. Yeah.
Yes, yes, that guy. And so there's a kid version, and then there's the grown-up version. And we've been playing with our kids since they were 6, the grown-up version. And the reason I love it so much is because in the center of the board is the rat race. And then on the outside of the board is your dreamland, where you have, you make lots of money and you get to live out your dreams, but you can't get there until you get off the rat race. And everybody picks a different profession, like there's cards of profession. And so it tells you what your income is. It tells you what your expenses are. And there's lawyer, there's doctor, there's nurse, there's janitor, there's truck driver. And then you pick cards to either buy real estate or gold coins or land and all that kind of stuff. And the whole goal is to teach you that you have to have passive income that exceeds your expenses in order to get out of the rat race. And that's a mindset that our middle class people do not have. And a lot of lawyers don't have, because we spend to our income or more to live the lifestyle that a lawyer is supposed to live. And so this board game really internalizes, and you're supposed to play it within a certain period of time. And if you that kind of stuff. So it pushes you, but you play it over and over, you get the pattern, it sets in your mindset. And then so there's doodads. Doodads are things like going to concerts and, things like that you're like, having a baby is lots of expenses. And it's hard playing it with your children, because you're like, oh, I had a baby. And you're like, oh. But it gets
you cost money.
Yeah, but it gets you thinking about the choices you make. And I love it.
Oh, I have to buy that now. And I think I need to make a list of everybody's preferences, because then we should have it somewhere on our website or show notes so everyone can find. Okay, so then thanks for sharing that. What would you consider your superpower?
I believe my superpower is communication. I think I can, I have an undergraduate degree in psychology, and I've done a lot of education in communication between people to move them not only across the bridge of indecision, but also in relating with each other. As an estate planning elder law attorney, I had to make successful situations from parents and adult children and their care, and people who have very different ideas about what good care is and all that kind of stuff. And so I think I have a great ability to communicate between parties. And I do that all day long with Quid Pro Quo, with buyers and sellers and team members, where I'm teaching owners to communicate with their staff and things like that. So I think my superpower definitely is the ability to communicate across people and get them to communicate with each other.
Well, that's definitely necessary. That's a great skill that we all need, but some have it better more than others. How are people able to reach out and find you if they want to reach out?
Yeah. So the best way to learn about us is through our website at quidproquolaw.com. And as you mentioned earlier, we do have a podcast as well called Smart Lawyers Position and Transition. And if you are a lawyer and on Facebook, we have a private Facebook group called The Art of Buying and Selling Law Firms.
Awesome. And any closing thoughts about preparing to sell, to buy, getting ready? Like any closing thoughts or resource that you want to share?
Well, I would just say that, we don't go into the law thinking we're going to sell our practice, because we don't even think of our practice as a business. Yeah. And so my closing thought would be, if in fact you want to get value out of all the years you've put in and leave a legacy that continues beyond you, then we have to shift our brains into being business people. And law school doesn't train us for that. So we need to reach out to people like you, Ruby, so that we can learn how to do the management of the practice. Okay. So that's what I'd recommend is people, you want to be a lawyer all day long, but then rely on Ruby to help me learn how to do the management of the practice, because that's what ultimately is going to sell your practice in the future. And do what you do best, and hire those that have other skill sets to help us get where we want to go. That's what I would say.
Yeah, great closing thoughts. So we've covered a lot today in this episode, between how to prepare for sale, considerations for valuation, what to consider if you were to buy, and a lot of things about who would be your ideal team. And I'm sure you have lots of stories if someone wanted to call you up and pick your brain, or they could just listen to your podcast. So for lots of great success and horror stories, I guess, of the whole process. And I think that there's very few people who are guiding people through this process. So I want to commend you on that. And I think there's we're going to need more of that as we got the baby boomer generation wanting to retire. And I think there's a lot going on in AI and just, paperless and technology and everything, and the shifting. And we didn't even get to touch on like what's going on in Arizona and Utah and just there's a lot of shifts going on. And so I think at any point, sort of like E-Myth Revisited, talking about prepare your business, as a franchise and keeping it as organized and ready for sale at any moment, I think, because you never know when you might want to. And I think that gives you a lot of options. Yeah.
Or when you might have to because you become disabled or dead.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. And I think that's generally what we see is like a lot of people, and you're talking about like taking control of the situation. And I love that, because a lot of people, it's only like reactionary to a situation and they hadn't planned in advance. So, well, thank you so much, Victoria. It was so great to have you. Thanks all that who listened. We've got, wow. I'm going to have to re-listen to this one. Lots of little nuggets I'm going to have to write out. Well, thanks everyone for joining us on this insightful journey today. Your time engagement, it means the world to us. And if you enjoyed this episode and want to continue the conversation, you can connect with us on the private Power Up Your Practice Facebook group. So keep powering up, and we'll see you next time. Feeling overwhelmed by admin tasks? You're not alone. Many immigration lawyers are in the same boat. That's where Staffy comes in. Over 90 law firm owners just like you have turned to Staffy for help with legal, administrative, marketing, and client-facing work. Now, Staffy's mission: to help lawyers find balance while growing their firm. With bilingual virtual staff and full HR support, they take the hassle out of a team management and focus on what matters most: your clients and your practice. I've personally benefited from Staffy's support with 7 virtual assistants of my own across various areas of 2 of my businesses, including my law firm. Now, schedule a free initial consultation with Staffy. That's stafi.cc, and use the code RUBY. That's RUBY for $500 off. Thank you for tuning in to the Power Up Your Practice Law Practice Management Podcast. I'm your host, Ruby Powers, and it's been a pleasure sharing this time with you. Join us next week for another episode where we'll continue to explore insightful strategies for success. Power Up Your Practice with us. See you next time.